Howdy, folks. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to the California Forward Building Equitable Economies series. This week is On the Ground Forest Resiliency Projects Part 2, The Return. This time, it's personal. Well, in any case, this is our second of really our focus on forest health, natural resources health, a key part of our work at California Forward as an organization committed to the triple bottom line of environmental sustainability, racial and economic justice, and economic opportunity. I'm Michael Weinberg, the CEO of California Forward, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Next slide. All right, a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. Heads up. Please do keep your mics muted when you're not speaking. And the way to interact with the members of our fabulous set of presenters today is through the question and answer panel, which should be on the right side of your screen and say questions. With no further ado, we're going to jump right into it. And then we will get to your questions at the tail end. All right, next slide. So many of you know this, a lot of friends, I'm sure, out there in internet land, but we really have what we've built is a sort of an ecosystem of equity, really what we call our sort of circle of life. And that is all the different elements of the movement that we power to make California's economy and government work for everyone. And we start with the evidence. You'll be seeing today some details from our California Dream Index, which measures the top 10 determinants of well-being of people in California in its different regions, its different race, ethnicities, levels of education, economic communities, and really ground ourselves in that evidence. Beyond that, we then take our work to the communities themselves. And we do that through alliance with our partners in the California Stewardship Network, community foundations, economic development corporations, and other groups committed to the triple bottom line. We work with them to put on the California Economic Summit with many other partners. And this is where we take that, not the kind of interest group politics of Sacramento, but take those priorities of the region and really try to set the agenda in a variety of different areas, develop better policy solutions for the state's most pressing challenges, and also really do a good job of implementing those policies that we pass. And sometimes California Forward, or our C4, the California Forward Action Fund, is the point of the spear in really trying to get that statutory change made. Right now, for example, we're working very hard on early action and budgetary action around funding for forest management projects. So that's an example of our direct lobbying and collective action on this issue that happens through the California Forward Action Fund. And then we take it back to the evidence to see whether we've moved the needle and start the whole circle of life again. Next slide. So today, we're really talking about one of the very many ways in which the different regions of the state are very closely interconnected. There are few areas more than natural resources that show the interdependence that exists between all the different areas of the state. And for example, we had Jasoniken, the head of the Sierra Institute for Community and Environment, on last week. He showed this great picture of how the Feather River Basin in far northern California helps provide water for Southern California. So we're all interconnected here. It's important for everybody in the entire state. It's an area that we're really interdependent. Next slide. And so forest health has a huge impact on the quality of water that we have in other parts of the state. One of the things that we measure through the California Dream Index is access to clean drinking water. And many of you know the really scandalous statistic here, which is that especially in the Central Valley, there are hundreds of thousands of people that do not have access to clean drinking water. And the health of forests at the headwaters that provide water to these systems is a part of why there are challenges in this regard. So again, more interconnectivity. Next slide. Okay, well, let's get this party started. And to do so, I'm going to call up my friend, Barbara Hayes. Barbara's been a leader of our work along with her colleagues at the Rural County Representatives of California. She's their Chief Economic Development Officer and a real thought leader in all things natural resources, forest management, overlap with economic development. So Barbara, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much, Micah. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. And a big thanks to Cal Forward for hosting these conversations during this webinar series. As Micah mentioned, I am the Chief Economic Development Officer for RCRC, Rural County Representatives of California. We represent 37 of California's rural counties in a variety of topic areas, but our priorities for purposes of this discussion this morning fall into three primary buckets. They are infrastructure, rural broadband, and forest resiliency. And I need to, in order to kind of tell you how we got to those three priorities, go back about 4 or more years ago when RCRC, together with Jim Mayer and Deb Collars from Cal Forward and Glenda Humiston, Vice President of UC Ag and Natural Resources, established Elevate Rural as part of Cal Forward's annual conference. The purpose of creating that platform, if you will, for discussion was to broaden the conversation and establish partnership around solutions to these three priority areas. This program has evolved into what we all are a part of today, these conversations. So sadly, these are not issues that exclusively affect rural California. As Micah just mentioned, there is an interconnection across California when it comes to natural resources and these three priority areas. So, you know, by way of example, for infrastructure, the whole state is long overdue for upgrades. Relative to rural broadband or broadband, it's a default for me, people. I go to rural broadband, but for broadband, generally speaking, COVID really illuminated the chasm that exists between the have and the have-nots relative to broadband accessibility. We're not even talking affordability. This is people who don't even have access to broadband. While it disproportionately impacts rural California, there are portions of the state's biggest cities that do not have broadband coverage. And the third priority area, the one we're focusing on today, that of forest resiliency, while most of the state's forest lands are found in rural California, there are some urban forests in the state, and forest health is important to all of us, no matter where you live in California. It impacts the quality and quantity of water that flows into the state's watersheds. It impacts air quality relative to carbon sequestration and carbon that's released in the form of catastrophic wildfires that we're seeing more and more. And forest health in general, we need to restore it to the forests in the state, as we're going to discuss today some solutions to that problem to reduce that risk of catastrophic wildfire. So it's clear that we have a problem in our forests. Each fire season is getting longer and more catastrophic than the one before, as evidenced by just last year's wildfire season. So RCRC has moved to be a part of the solution. There is no one solution, unfortunately, to a problem as enormous as the one we are facing in our forests in California. But RCRC's contribution to that effect in one small part is the formation of Golden State Natural Resources. This is a new nonprofit public benefit corporation established by RCRC and will be executed in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service via a master stewardship agreement, whereby we will work with the U.S. Forest Service to go into the national forests of California initially and remove all that low to no value biomass, the fire fuel, if you will, remove it from the forest, restoring forest health and resiliency within the forest. We will make initially commercial product in the form of industrial pellets for industrial energy generation, which we will export to existing markets overseas. Again, this is but one solution. There have to be many to a problem this large, which brings us to today's program. We're going to hear a few more solutions to this enormous problem. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This problem will take a village, it will take partnership, and it will take new ways of doing things, but it must be done. So with that, I want to turn it back to Micah to get us started with the program today. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Next slide. So at California Forward, we are all about getting SH*T done. You know, we talk about stuff a lot, we fight about it, you know, in interest group politics, but it's so exciting to have groups like RCRC that do a lot of the, you know, policy work, also, you know, moving forward with something like the Golden State Natural Resources to actually get this going. And so we have another great example of stuff getting done in the state. And to talk to you about it today, we have Jason Kuiken, who is the forest supervisor for Stanislaus National Forest. So welcome, Jason. What are you up to in that neck of the woods?
All right, thank you so much, Micah, and thank you, Barbara, for those great introductions. You really set the stage for what is this issue and why does it affect the lives of everyone? This issue of fire on the landscape, the issue of forest health, not only impacts those that live directly in and around the Stanislaus National Forest or the other forests in California or the West, but it really affects the lives of every citizen in the United States, and I would say beyond. And so before I kind of go into the presentation in total, I want to give a little bit of background on me and why this is so important. Is I grew up in central Wisconsin on the banks of the Wisconsin River, but I was lucky enough to have an uncle on the Front Range of Colorado in the Denver metro area, and my family traveled out there in summer and winter at least once a year, and we would go explore the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest and the Pike and San Isabel National Forest and go up to the White River as well. And so I came to know and love the mountains. That's why I decided to pursue a career in the Forest Service, is that I wanted to be a part of that. And yet over the last 15, 20 years, those forests that I knew as a child and grew to love as a child have changed. First, they changed through the mountain pine beetle epidemic of the early to mid 2000s that impacted 4 million acres between Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Nebraska. And that really started to change how that system functions, what the forest, not just the forest health, but how communities interact with it, how the water supply goes into Denver and into the rest of the Colorado River system, and then fires have followed suit, and that has changed that landscape. I've moved around, so growing up from a kid, and then I started working in the Forest Service, and I've worked in Colorado and Minnesota and Washington D.C. and Washington State, and then some shorter time in Oregon and Wyoming, and now here in California. And those same issues occur really throughout the West. And so what do we do about it? How do we identify what are the issues, but what are some of the solutions that we can grab a hold of and be able to move together on? And so what I'm going to be talking about really are a collection of ideas that others have started, and really trying to piece some of those things together, because the landscape is changing. If you could go to the next slide here real quick. So our landscape is changing, and it's changing quickly. So what you see here is California, right, or most of California on the right side of the screen. Within that is a subsection really that are highlighting the Sierra Nevadas, and that the hash marked on that Sierra Nevadas are up to about 7,200 feet in elevation from the foothills communities. And that 7,200 feet in elevation refers to two different things. It refers to a major vegetation type change, and the band that type change goes is between 6,000 and 7,200 feet, depending on slope and other things. But within that are those orange areas. Those orange areas represent large fires in the last 10 years. So this is a 10-year fire history map in the Sierra Nevadas. And when you start looking at the data within there, there's on the west side of the crest, the Pacific crest, almost 20% of the landscape has burned in unplanned wildfire in the last 10 years. About a third of that occurred in 2020 alone, as Barbara and Micah were just talking about, as fires are increasing in size and scale and rapidity. And yet, if you look at history, before European settlement, there was a lot of fire on this landscape. Fire history, these are fire-dependent ecosystems, and you would regularly have had fire between every 5 and 22 years or so on pretty much every acre, again up to that 6,000 to 7,000 foot in elevation range. But the fires would have been lower in intensity, they would have been more regular, and through active fire suppression, through changes in our forest management practices, through climate change, our systems are functioning different. We have more trees per acre than we did in a historic context. We have more fuel on the ground from a historic context because of those past practices and climate change. And so we're again having larger, more destructive wildfires on the landscape. So a high severity fire not only impacts that vegetation, it impacts and changes how water, how snow is stored on the landscape, and how long it lasts on the landscape, how much debris is going into our reservoirs, into our rivers, and down into the valley for drinking water, and also impacting agricultural uses. And this is a trajectory that has to change. And so right in the middle of that, you can see, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, you probably can't see my cursor. Right in the middle of the Sierras is a lime green, what I'll call amoeba-shaped area, and that's called the SERAL project. The SERAL project is a larger scale NEPA project that we're working on. It's 118,000 acres, and it's really trying to look at and drive to this conversation of needing to increase the pace and scale of restoration. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And so why are we going, or why are we looking at larger landscapes, and why are we, and how are we all connected? And so on the left side, you see a picture of my family. And not only do I like looking at my wonderful boys and my wife, but really this is wanted to hone in on, this is a picture at Pinecrest. So Pinecrest is a very popular lake. It's a popular recreation area. We can have on a nice summer weekend, we can have within a 600 acre, or I'll call it a square mile area, we can have upwards of 5,000 to 12,000 people in that area, going to the beach, hiking around the lake, staying at some of the resorts or organizational camps or developed campgrounds. And so it's a popular thing. And that popular recreation area brings a lot of recreation economy into Tuolumne County. So for Tuolumne County, Mariposa, Alpine, and Calaveras County, recreation and tourism are the #1 industry. So the health of our landscape is directly tied to recreational use, recreational income, but so to our communities. So we have a number of communities in and around these forests that are impacted directly or indirectly by fire, and where that indirect comes from sometimes is also the infrastructure on the landscape. We have wooden water flumes that supply our drinking water in Tuolumne County and throughout some of the other parts of of California. We have power lines. We have other broadband internet services has gone through the forest. And so when large scale fire occurs, it impacts all of that. It also impacts wildlife habitat, fish habitat that we care about and that we're trying to keep around into the future in a healthy way and improve that habitat. And then the last thing that I have on there is water supplies. So Pinecrest is one of the holding sources for not just power creation, but also water supply for Tuolumne County and beyond. So water that comes off of these mountains goes throughout Tuolumne County, downriver into ag and other municipal sources. Next slide, please. And so the problem is great. We have this, I should have given the statistic before. The Stanislaus National Forest is about 900,000 acres of public land, and most of that landscape needs some type of treatment. Again, being fire dependent ecosystems that had historically regular fire on the landscape means that trees grow, bushes and shrubs and grasses grow, and so being able to manage that in a meaningful and sustainable fashion is really essential. And so in order to do this best, we believe here on the Stanislaus that we need to work with our partners in a shared stewardship manner. We don't have all of the capacity or all of the know-how and knowledge in the Forest Service alone, and so we work with our partners. And one of our collaborative groups here is the Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions Collaborative, which is a wonderful group of folks from environmental organizations, from industry, from recreational groups, from our local politicians. And they've come together around these common goals of protecting our communities, enhancing habitat, ensuring that we have recreational opportunities for generations to come. And that at first meant they've been together for over 10 years, that it was about conversation, about understanding the different values on the landscape, understanding people's perspective. But now we're about action, we're about work, and that work is how do we be thoughtful and strategic in where are we going on the landscape, why are we going there, and what treatments on the landscape do we agree to be able to use in a more rapid fashion. And so with big challenges come big ideas, and that's where this social and ecological resilience across the landscape or SERAL project comes in. Is working with YSS, we identified what was viewed as the highest risk landscape on the Stanislaus National Forest, and have been working together to try to identify what are those treatments and what tools can we use to be able to identify the right treatment at the right place at the right scale. And so we're working together not just with YSS and the Stanislaus National Forest, but also with universities, with our Forest Service researchers within Pacific Southwest Research Station, Rocky Mountain Research Station, to use models and tools that allow us to be transparent and replicable around what is the risk of fire reaching a certain value on the landscape, be it a community, be it a power line or water source, but also wildlife habitat. And how do we design the right treatment at the right scale to best protect those values that we mutually care about. And so we're using these models, trying to piece them together to look at that 118,000 acre project area, which only 89,000 of which are managed by the Forest Service, the balance of which are private lands or Bureau of Land Management lands, that we can also work across boundaries, because this problem and this issue of wild and fire is not constrained only to federal lands. It's our private lands within our state lands. And so we're working with our Highway 108 Fire Safety Council to be able to bridge those gaps, to be able to be strategic in where do we go. Next slide, please. I think I'm running out of time. And so scale matters. And so these models are allowing us to identify in those 118,000 acres, what are the highest priorities, meaning where is that risk of fire impacting the values we care about the highest, and being able to then identify those treatments around those in the best, most strategic manner. And then that will result in a record of decision and environmental impact statement that says we need to do certain activities, and those certain activities include pre-commercial thinning and commercial thinning, so products going to create 2x4s, 4x4s, fence posts, etc., so that we can use that material, and biomass removal that can go to energy creation. And these are mutual things. This is about trying to make sure that we're able to spur economy so that we can not just protect those things on the landscape we care about, but also make sure that we can continue building homes and creating energy and otherwise. And all of that sustainable forestry practice will allow us to apply fire back on the landscape in a safe manner. So these being fire dependent ecosystems really rely on fire. And so if we can do all of these treatments in a strategic and logical fashion, then we can apply fire on our terms. And that's that lower right hand picture is a prescribed fire that was done 2 years ago at Bear Mountain, just north of Yosemite. And so what we're looking at trying to do is be able to work with communities, be able to educate on why smoke is in the air through prescribed fire, and we're doing a good job there. But I don't want to lose sight of we can't apply that fire on the ground on our terms in a safe manner if we don't do some of these pre-treatments first. And that's because there's a lot of biomass on the landscape, and that biomass is adjacent to our communities and those other values. And so if next slide, please, or is that the last one? Oh, so this goes back to the why do we care about this? And so why we care again is that all of our citizens in California and beyond really need our forests healthy, resilient to wild and fire, and so that we can have all of those positive economic impacts occurring. We're all touched by this, and so appreciate the time, appreciate the opportunity to be here and share just a little bit about our SERAL project. Thanks, Micah.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. And we'll get back to you in the question and answer here. We've got some interest already. But now, next slide, please. I'd like to bring up Cole Prisbilla. He's the Director of Innovation and Business Assistance for Tuolumne County, one of the state's very exciting young leaders doing amazing things in his own region. And a personal thank you for growing a beard just for this webinar, Cole. So thank you for doing very on point, as you said, with the lumberjack, vibe. So we appreciate all the effort that you're putting into this, and looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you, Mike. I'll also attribute it and be a proud dad. It's also my 4-week-old new baby son beard. So.
Oh, congratulations.
So thank you, Micah. Thanks for allowing me the time to share what we're doing over here in the Central Sierra, very similar to Jason. And Jason talked about supply. So now I'm going to talk about demand. So our supply aggregation pilot project is a developing organization that would be a new model for leveraging private capital to support forest restoration, with its focus on connecting biomass to business. And the organization would act as an aggregator and broker of low to no value biomass by operating as a business model for forest restoration, business attraction efforts, and local economic resiliency. With our region potentially expecting the addition of 6 new additional natural resources manufacturing companies by 2023, the organization will ensure the viability of our region's current businesses while supplying these new businesses with the commitments they need to support their expansions. I believe the pivotal piece in our concept is exploring leveraging private, non-commercial vegetation management as a base feedstock supply to balance the risk associated with maintaining reliable supply from public lands and state assets. Next slide. Our developing organization came from a truly economic development perspective of attracting and retaining businesses in the Central Sierra region. The concept came through scholarly research, business and stakeholder outreach, and working with our state partners. I believe that sustainably managing California forests and promoting community fire resilience requires investment beyond the capacity of public funding alone. And I believe by encouraging wood products market development and innovations in our region, we will provide that pathway to integrate private capital with public investments to spur economic opportunities, reinforce forest practices, and support community vegetation management. The organization is not yet formalized, but rather is actively being built, and the pilot project has the support of 5 Central Sierra counties and their board of supervisors. Next slide. During the research phase, I focused in on a white paper from the University of California, Santa Cruz, which is my alumni. And this paper coalesced the available Sierra Nevada biomass materials and their viable uses in manufacturing with high potential companies and their thoughts on including the material in their product lines. One of the conclusions of the papers is, if we want to encourage private industry capital investment, we need to consider these 6 key issues. And so prior to making any of my own assumptions, I dug into some of the research and called some of the businesses outlined in the paper and found that truly the vast majority of the potential industry partners felt new and existing wood products businesses are struggling to access long-term feedstock contracts, and they're necessary to access financing and assure business stability. The Central Sierra Supply Aggregation Organization will act as the broker for a consistent, reliable supply of biomass via both public and private sources. The organization would aggregate from master stewardship agreements, good neighbor authorities, PG&E, other state organizations such as Caltrans as they do forest management to protect their assets, along with the idea of a community scale vegetation management on private property. The goal is to create long-term feedstock contracts with existing and new businesses. I focused in on the key issues that I can control, and I think the priority of this organization is addressing supply while highlighting the work our region has done on transportation and workforce. So let's talk about some of those. Next slide. These are some of the issues I think we and in your communities too can promote, encourage, or cause change. For us, I'll focus on the opportunities that were created out of the 2013 rimfire, our educational opportunities, and our central geographic location that includes rail. So in our case, due to the 2013 rimfire, Tuolumne County received $70 million from the federal government to address unmet recovery needs in the rimfire footprint, while also supporting community protection and resilience. And just as a reminder, the rimfire was one of those first fires in the current wave of mega fires. And it also led up to some of the bark beetle infestation in the sense that, in our case, that's what really encouraged the high heat of the fire. And so of the 70 million, there are 3 pillars of money. One goes to the restoration projects, the second goes to 2 resiliency centers, and the third pillar is $22 million allocation dedicated to what is called the Biomass Utilization Fund. And this fund provides loans to businesses that are located in or relocating to Tuolumne County, but they must increase the utilization of low to no value wood from our surrounding forests. And so our region, like I said, is anticipating 6 natural resources companies. 4 of those are utilizing this BUF fund, Biomass Utilization Fund. With that, we're expecting 200 to 300 full-time natural resources industry careers added by 2023. Those careers will be at a biochar business, a small-scale biomass energy plant, a company that sorts biomass for multiple product lines, a potential biofuel plant, and a $150 million capital investment in a pellet plant with contracts to ship material to Japan for energy production. So let's back up and let's get to that caveat. Even with some of those core elements resolved, during outreach to those businesses, I continue to receive pushback on supply. And let me give you just two quick examples. One was a local example, a business already in Tuolumne County. They do wood shavings, and they said they'd love to expand. They'd love to find new opportunities in our region, but their 5-year history of supply had such large fluctuations and a lack of long-term contract supply issues that prevented any future investment. And then the second is a national, larger biofuel organization that has no presence in the Sierra Nevada, but is headquartered in California. They would be open to investing in the region, but one of their things that they've talked about is they want to encourage a form of carbon credit that would assist with the risk associated of subsidizing forest management through their work and taking biomass to convert it to a renewable energy source. So the supply conversations across the 5 counties with current businesses in operation detail a similar story. Short timelines for public land logging, which leads to large stockpiling during late summer, fall months, unreliable rates with fluctuations in excess of $25 per bone dry ton, and inconsistent supply. I believe this inconsistency and unreliability leads to a large amount of risk when creating projections for their future capital investments. Next slide. We're at the convergence point for significant innovation in creating solutions for the natural resource manufacturing industry and forest management in California by spearheading this regional approach. And so to reiterate, I believe the pivotal piece in our concept is exploring the leveraging private non-commercial vegetation management as a base feedstock supply. The addition of private vegetation component is vital as our region includes a large mix of private and public lands. While Tuolumne County is 70% federal lands with the Stanislaus and Yosemite National Forest, Calaveras County, for example, is the exact opposite. They're 70% private lands with logging companies as major landowners and small private residencies. So to move the low value biomass out of the national forest, the cost is extremely high. It requires large logging trucks traveling on dirt, largely unmaintained roads up incredibly steep ravines. And so add on top of this an aging logging truck workforce who are closer to retirement than investment in more efficient trucks, we have to discuss a different model. And so therefore, I also agree with the Joint Institute for Wood Products Innovation that bufferwood is essential to this conversation. And if you don't know what bufferwood is that low value biomass in deadwood within a 300-foot setback from the center line of each side of, this is the important part, currently open and improved roads. And of note, you can see while I said Tuolumne County is 70% federal forest on the previous slide, 57% of the bufferwood in Tuolumne is on private land. So the idea of bufferwood is crucial for efficiencies. Next slide. In addition, we have this idea of an innovation district where we want to encourage subsidizing low-cost rent, a business assistant atmosphere, and helping to have research in key types of woods that businesses are interested in exploring. Next slide. The next steps to us are a concept study. We're going to be doing a feedstock analysis of the how much and the where. We'll build off of already completed studies, but really get down to the parcel level for private vegetation management. So where does that supply go from biomass to business? It'll cover how much it costs to move the material and put it all into a GIS map for the parcel level. The legal analysis is who has the authorities, what's the structure, etc. Financial analysis, we're going to talk about how do we fund this program, what's the economies scale of benefits, do we include El Dorado County, for example, and we want to make sure this is a triple bottom line that's a net neutral and net positive organization as well. And finally, we need that political and stakeholder outreach. How do we gain support? How do we consider property owner concerns, especially around concerns of county code compliance not being enforced or reported when contractors do work on their private property? And in the works cited, I put a newspaper article that had a very similar issue. And the final component is how do we incentivize participation? Next slide. So I'm excited about this organization. I believe in the beneficial outcomes. I'm striving for a triple bottom line contributor to our community. I stated it's about biomass to business, but I believe it will quickly have downstream benefits. And as a reminder, I believe the pivotal piece is that exploring that leveraging of private, non-commercial vegetation management as our base feedstock. I believe our organization helps to reduce the harms of forest fires and the unhealthy summer months we have all endured. This organization will help to curb the investment of forest fire preventions and move funds into forest management. And I'm excited to share more and share how this concept can be replicated across the state. So next slide is a works cited if you want to read a little bit more about some of the different things that I've sourced. And finally, next slide, this is my contact information. Cell phone is on there. Call me, text me. I love to talk about these things. So Micah and California Forward, thank you for the time today to share what we're doing here in Central Sierra, California.
That was awesome, Cole, and it also marks the first time that somebody has provided a bibliography within their presentation on one of our webinars. So thank you so much for that.
Glad to be a first.
And for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
All right, so our last short presentation before we get to your questions is going to come from two of our members of our California Stewardship Network, leaders of that group for a very long time, leaders of the California Economic Summit, and actually awardees at the 2018 California Economic Summit as Steward Leaders of the Year. So please welcome my very good friends, Glenda Humiston and Paul Granillo. Glenda is Vice President for UC Agricultural and Natural Resources, and Paul Granillo is President and CEO of the Inland Empire Economic Institute. So what are you folks up to these days? What do you got? What are you cooking up for us?
Well, thanks, Micah. We've got a pretty exciting project we're working on. You know, one of the things that's been one of the pleasures of my professional career has been how active I've been with the State Economic Summit, California Forward, for the last several years, and all the great work we've done there, laying foundation for the kind of opportunities you're hearing about today. As you know, California Forward has always co-hosted the summit with one of my favorite organizations, the California Stewardship Network, which is a group of regional economic development entities that have signed on to a triple bottom line approach, something I passionately believe in. The other organization that I just truly, deeply love and have for decades is cooperative extension. And here in California, that's the University of California's cooperative extension, a service of our land-grant university, which not only develops new science and technologies through its research, but more importantly, its mission to get that science and that knowledge and new technologies into the hands of people that can use them. So one of the things Paul and I are cooking up is a co-funded position that can be a catalyst to reach back into the entire UC system, that Joint Institute on Wood Products Innovation, the campuses, the national labs, all of the knowledge and resources of the University of California, and link it up with an economic development organization to try to bring to fruition some of this forest biomass manufacturing to wood products. So I'm pretty excited about it. Paul, why don't you take it from there?
Thanks, Glenda. Mike, I'm just, as you can tell, Glenda and I are excited about this because I think it's a great opportunity. So California's Inland Empire, 4.6 million people, 11% of Californians, and the great majority of them live in the San Bernardino Valley. And the valley is surrounded by the San Gabriel National Monument, the San Bernardino National Forest, and the San Jacinto Mountains. And I think we've got a great opportunity to elevate the conversation that we're having today in our region, and to try and bring together industry and environmental and people that are passionate about our forests and mitigating against wildfires while developing new economic opportunities, higher wage job opportunities. So I'm just grateful to Glenda and looking forward to partnering with anybody who wants to help us with this project.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Glenda. You know, this is a great example of the importance of this issue to a part of the state people may not understand. It is so important. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing there. All right. Well, we are going to launch into the Q&A portion of our agenda. So I will address some of these questions to some of our speakers who will bring themselves back up on camera. And per usual, for a California Forward audience, these are very specific, very technical questions. And so I'm excited to learn actually a lot from the answers. So question for Jason from Michael Gardner. So much of the land obviously is in private hands. So the question is, as a small forest landowner, I know firsthand that the CAL FIRE CFIP funding for private land fire remediation just doesn't go very far. So, you know, what's being done to try to aggregate funding from various sources so that not only public lands, but also private lands can be managed in a more resilient fashion? And is there any way to sort of blend or braid that work together? And so interested in your perspective on this, Jason. And if there are other panelists that want to speak to this as well, that want to put themselves on camera, that's good too.
No, and that's a fantastic question because it costs a lot, right, for federal government, for private landowners, for anybody to do the work necessary to make a more resilient ecosystem. And so what we're trying to do is a couple of things. With those models I was talking about, be able to show on private lands what could or should be done, and be able to then work with the Highway 108 Fire Safe Council through YSS so that we can work together, because again, this is all of our problem. And so how do we identify those priority treatments and where to go? And by doing so, if we can have a cohesive plan, there's actually something called the National Cohesive Strategy that speaks directly to this, is how do we work across lands? And it's by identifying those treatments together and then walking into the door for grant opportunities to private investors, and being able to work across boundary to make that happen. So we're doing that. So as the Forest Service, we have some state and private funds out of appropriated sources that we've granted to the Highway 108 Fire Safe Council to implement some of these projects. We've been successful through YSS in getting some funds from CAL FIRE through the California Climate Investment, CCI funds in the past, and we're hoping to do so into the future through those sources and others, because again, it's that needing to work together, and by going to scale, by looking together, feel that we have a better chance of being successful on all lands. But really with those private lands, as we're having the county, Tuolumne County in this case, engaged is really critical to success there. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah,
thanks, Jason. Barbara, I've got a question for you. A lot of interest in the Golden State Natural Resources project. Wanted to bring you back up here. So you may have seen the question from Gail Work, who's fire safe for San Mateo County, asking whether Golden State Natural Resources is expected to implement shaded fuel breaks as a part of a multifaceted approach to fuel reduction, are fire control lines, evacuation routes being integrated, etc.
The short answer is yes. So we are contemplating all sources of biomass. We're looking at utility veg management programs, the buff areas that Cole mentioned in his presentation. We want to be a resource for this material so that there's a place to take this low to no value material as it comes off of the lands to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. So we're really, the door is wide open. I mentioned just very briefly in the intro that we're working very closely with the U.S. Forest Service. That's our first step, our first foot in the door, if you will, but we know that there are a lot of other sources. So yes, we are looking at working with all the partners once we get on the ground locally to be a resource and a good partner at the local level.
Awesome. Thanks, Barbara. A question for you, Cole, new dad and lumberjack from Tuolumne County. The question is, what do you need for this work? What kind of private investment levels are we talking about here? Orders of magnitude, right? In order to really make this go.
So I'm going to go on two routes of this. The first is the private investment for the actual organization kind of study and beginning to go through this next process, the next steps that I mentioned. We're planning on doing that feasibility study, and hopefully we have some good news through some of the state legislature on some of the budget that they're putting forward through for fire. So we might potentially get an opportunity to have a grant through the state to pay for that study. But we've also had conversations with Sierra Nevada Conservancy about funding this study. And really, we're talking, it's nothing in the world of study financing or private capital. We're talking about a $50,000 to $150,000 study. So on my end, to get the next steps going, it's pretty small. As for the private investment later down the line, that's one of the things that I think this study is really going to help us decide is we have these businesses coming to town. There's, like I said, 6 companies. And so for the next step of private investment, that's what I was saying of what private investment we need is it's just encouraging those companies like the 6 that are coming in to continue to have the opportunity for more supply aggregation. And so I think I kind of answered it, Micah, maybe not a little bit. So there you go.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks, Cole. I want to dive in. I think we have a couple of questions kind of in this vein around sort of carbon release as a result of a number of these activities. So interested in kind of bringing up anybody from the panel that would want to address this. But the question is, well, how do you address the problems of air pollution and the carbon release that comes from these types of controlled burns? The questioner suggests that historically Native people did not have significant problems in these areas, so using their practice has limited applications for our situation. So just interested in whether Jason or Cole or anybody else working on this really thinks about the sort of air pollution and or carbon release issues associated with doing these types of controlled burns.
No, those are some great questions. So traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, is really important, and we are working with tribes here locally, regionally, and nationally to understand what some of those practices were and how they worked, so that we can apply that same knowledge on the ground today and moving forward. The challenge that we face is that because we've been so active in fire suppression for 100 years, that biomass has accumulated to a point that wouldn't have been here 200 years ago, that when those fires were applied. And so we in order to get back to that place, we have a lot of work to do. And that question then around chips versus biomass for energy creation is a challenging one, because when you move from shrubs, tops and limbs and even small trees and put that into chips, that's not how the system would have functioned either. And too many tons per acre of chips and mastication create other ecological issues. And so there's no perfect answer to any of this, and that's where working together to figure out how best to do it and put some of that material into energy creation that we need to make sure our lights work and, well, our teams and meetings work these days. But those are hard questions, and again, there is no perfect answer to it. But purely looking at chips and mastication does create some other issues based on the scale of the issue or problem.
Cool, and thanks for the 2-for-1, because I was sort of referring to the other question as well, so thanks for pulling it up there. Glenda, what's your take on this?
Well, I think it's really important for folks to always think about opportunity cost. The reality is the wildfires that we all suffer create an enormous amount of extremely dangerous air pollution, and typically in large volumes and at some of the worst times of the year, when air systems are holding it over large populated areas. We've seen that almost every year for the last several. when we're talking about controlled burns, two factors really need to be taken into account. First of all, they're timed so that the air pollution is going to be lessened, and actually the controlled burn itself is usually after some brush removal and biomass removal has taken place. And that's one of the reasons we're also interested in finding high value uses for that biomass, because we do need to get the excess biomass out of the forest, and then over the coming decades get back into a more natural controlled burning regime that mimics what Mother Nature would have done naturally. So I'm a big fan of controlled burns, because in the long run, it is going to reduce air pollution. And hopefully, if we do it right, we're going to get some jobs and economic development out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I
Looks like
could,
you want
Mike,
to come back in on this, Jason.
yeah,
We're on to something.
Yeah, no, and so Glenda just hit on a good quote that I want to bring up. So Paul Hesburgh is a great fire researcher in the Pacific Northwest. I was lucky enough to work with him when I worked in Wenatchee, and he has this program called Era of Megafires that's kind of a traveling roadshow. It's very good. If you ever, and there's a TED Talk YouTube thing on it that you can also watch. But in that, he has this quote that I love that hits on Glenda's point, which is, how do you want your smoke? How do you want your fire? Because again, these are fire dependent ecosystems. And so how do we get back to that place? Because there will be smoke and fire, and it's a great quote. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a no fire option, right? This actually brings in another question that we have here around liability, right? So in our presentation last week, there was a real concern raised about it's the liability associated between these controlled burns is very, very difficult. And so how much are both insurance companies kind of allowing that to happen, but also how should we think about the sort of the advantages that insurance companies could give to landowners and others, by virtue of having done these fire mitigation activities?
So Micah, I can offer a quick thought, and then other folks probably have more. Liability is a huge issue, but the insurance companies are recognizing they have got to be part of the solution. I've had several reach out to me just in the last few months wanting to talk about how we can organize these kind of solutions. You also had another question there about some of the other things UC is doing. One of the things that we're real excited about is that the governor and the legislature have included some funding, not enough in our opinion, but some funding for more fire advisors in our UC Cooperative Extension Network. And one of the reasons those are critical is because they help organize controlled burn councils and work with homeowners associations and communities to make sure that as you organize those controlled burns, you are being extremely safe and you're using the science and minimizing the risk, which is part of controlling the liability.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always exciting when other members of our audience are answering questions in the question panel. John Buckley mentioned that prescribed burns consume some level of forest fuel in a safe and well-planned manner, while without prescribed fires, high severity wildfires will burn far more aggressively, produce far more smoke, and create far more risk. So John, thanks for adding that to the chat. And I think we're getting near to the end of our time here. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. And I'd like to ask everybody to join us, ideally in person, though we'll do at a minimum a hybrid event in Monterey, our next California Economic Summit, November 9th and 10th, as I mentioned. Right now, we're deep in the work. We come together at the Economic Summit, we create our plans for the next year. We did a call to action around wildfire funding, help tee up the state's forest management plan. Very, very involved in that right now. And then we'll get together this time in Monterey, although we move all around the state, to look at what we've been able to accomplish during the year and make our plans for the next year. Feel free to support the work that we're doing by visiting our donation page and stay engaged. The best way is the California Forward newsletter, which you can sign up for and get all kinds of fantastic information about forest management, broadband, housing, workforce development. If you are a California policy wonk or somebody who cares about California's communities, somebody who cares about building equitable economies, this is the newsletter for you. I promise, it's a great one. Great video content, terrific stuff. So we'll see you here, hopefully. Bring all your friends. Same bat time 2 weeks from now, same bat channel, which is the internet channel. And we're going to be focusing next time on our California Forward Young Leaders. We have a Young Leader Council at California Forward that is very involved in our work. If we're talking about the future of California when it moves forward, we need to have the voices there, the diverse voices from different ethnic communities, different geographic communities, helping drive our work. So looking forward to introducing you to some of these young leaders and telling you about their call to action for the state of California in 2 weeks on March 25th at 11 a.m. So thanks again for being with us this morning, folks, and we'll be in touch with you very soon.